Okay, Garrett, thank you very much for this very kind introduction. So it's really nice of you to invite me to this seminar series. So thanks also to Max and Marcella and to Greta for organizing this and for giving me the opportunity to discuss with you some of my work on algorithmic government. What I would like to do today, and it's a bit different again from what I originally thought, but it's quite well connected, is to talk with you about algorithmic government with a focus on the key concept of bureaucracy. Bureaucracy, as we all know, is a key concept in the study of public administration and public management. And I would like to use actually the theoretical concept of the bureaucracy to get a better understanding of algorithmic government. What I would like to do today actually is to discuss two papers with you. One that will be published shortly in Information Polity, and one that we have already realized in Dutch, and we're working now on an international version, so that's more work in progress. In the second hour, we will discuss the chapter that I sent to you as reading for this meeting, but I won't talk about this chapter now because that will come back in the second part of the meeting. My key message actually for today is we really need to work on the legitimacy of algorithmic government. I think there's a real danger of ending up in a sort of a technocratic state where technocracy is quite dominant in the way we organize our societies, and that requires that we understand the dynamics of algorithmic government, and that we take action to ensure that it's a democratic form of government. So that's the key message, but I'll come back to that again in the end. Let me start with the question, what is algorithmic government? And I use the term algorithmic government because I think we have to realize that that governments are increasingly dependent on all kinds of algorithms for the way they function. I'm specifically interested in the police, so I have some examples from the police, and in the police in the Netherlands, but also in other countries. Robots are being used to moderate contacts with citizens, so services provided by robots instead of human beings. Algorithms are used for what they call social listening, so that means they listen to Twitter and other social media communications to get a sense of what's going on and to maybe detect forms of societal unrest at an early stage. Algorithms are used to investigate cold cases and to see whether new theories can be developed. Algorithms are used for early identification of kids at risk, so that they can be followed more closely and probably forms of criminal behavior can be prevented. Algorithms are used for predictive policing. That's where the two pictures in the slides refer to. The one on the picture on the left is an actually example of what an predictive policing system can look like, and the other one is about the film Minority Report, which is sort of a dystopian vision of how predictive policing could come to play a key role in our societies. So all these algorithms are being used in the police, and in many other organizations it's the same. So many of the processes in organizations are becoming algorithmicized. Second point is this is an aspect of socio-technical change. I think in the literature there's sometimes a focus on things like algorithmic accountability or algorithmic transparency, and it sort of assumes that it's about the algorithms that we need to design or develop or influence in a certain way. But what I emphasize in my work is that it's always about a process of socio-technical change. To put it bluntly, an algorithm that is not used does not have any impact. So the algorithm only becomes a real thing in an organization if it's being used by people, which also means that the organization changes around the algorithm. So people have to acquire new competences in the same way that we have to acquire the competences to work with this digital environment. So in government organizations, people have to acquire the competences to work with these algorithms. Different structures are formed in the organization. Data departments, for example, where data are collected to train algorithms. Policies are being developed to guide the use of algorithms in organizations. So there's all kinds of things, organizational things happening around this introduction of algorithm. And if you want to understand what algorithms do to organizations, we have to understand this is a social process of algorithmization. And a third element here is that this process of algorithmization, the forming of algorithmic government, does not only affect the effectiveness and efficiency of government. That's often why they are introduced, to make the police be more efficient in catching criminals or detecting crime or providing services. But it has all kinds of other effects as well. The algorithmization also influences the transparency of the police. Can we still know why they make certain decisions to deploy police forces in a certain neighborhood? It influences human contact. You may want to report a crime, but then you have to talk to a robot instead of a human being. It influences things like bias and discrimination, in the sense that that there may be a bias in predictive policing systems or other systems that can result in biased forms of government. So these, I would say, are the key features of algorithmic government. And while in the study of algorithmic government, often the new is being emphasized, and the new technologies and the rapid developments, I would like to emphasize that we have to understand this process of algorithmization as a clash between the old and the new. And on the left-hand side, you see Max Weber, same name as Max, who organized this meeting, but you probably all know him as the founder of our thinking about bureaucratic organizations. Max Weber laid actually the foundations for our thinking about democratic government by his principles of a bureaucratic organization as guided by hierarchy, formalization, standardization, but also subservient to its political masters. And again, if we look at the police today, we still see that it's very much a formal organization where they have all kinds of procedures. It's a hierarchical organization where there are clear ranks. And it's an organization that's subservient to its political masters. The police has to abide by the rules that are set by parliaments, by representatives of the people. So by making this connection between a government organization that can implement government policies but is subservient to its political masters, Max Weber laid the groundwork for thinking about government. But what's happening now is that this traditional framework is being shaken up by these rapid developments of algorithmization, where tech companies and tech people in government organizations all around the world are developing these new technologies that are rapidly changing the way we organize meetings like this, the way we buy things, the way we interact, and also the way we organize government. So it's not only about the new, it's not only about the algorithms, it's about the clash between the old and the new. And we have to understand and study that clash, and to follow up a little bit further on the ideas of Weber, and to highlight how I want to talk with you about bureaucracy in an age of algorithms. This is basically the idea of government that Weber has presented to us. At the bottom part of this slide, you see a citizen. A citizen can vote and vote for representatives. Then the representatives can provide rules for bureaucracy, and bureaucracy can implement these, and these implementations again influence us as citizens. So it's a very basic idea, but this basic idea can also be used to understand some of the dangers of our current times, because one of the big dangers, I would say, is the rise of authoritarianism, which is probably one of the big fears about populism and current developments in the US. And the rise of authoritarianism is really about the left-hand side of this slide, the risk that the idea of democratically electing our representatives that then can govern the country does not function anymore. But the other risk is the risk of technocracy, the increased rule by bureaucratic organizations that use all kinds of technologies to implement their policies. An extreme form that would be a police that cannot be controlled anymore because it's a black box, and in the black box all kinds of algorithms are being used, and we don't really understand how these outcomes are connected to democratic rule. Well, as you will understand, we could have a very interesting conversation about authoritarianism, but I would like to focus here on the risk of technocracy. And I do that by asking two types of questions about bureaucracy in the age of algorithms. First question is about the internal changes. How does the use of algorithms change the organization of government? Can we still hold on to the ideal type of the bureaucracy that Weber developed, or do we need to think about bureaucratic organization in a different way? And the second question I would like to talk with you about is the external changes to bureaucracy. Then we come to the part of the legitimacy. How does the use of algorithms change the position of bureaucracy in legitimate government? So these are the two questions that I think help us to understand bureaucracy in the age of algorithms, and which I think is crucial to understanding legitimate government. Let me start with the first question, the internal changes. I wrote a paper on this with, among others, Lucas Lorenz, who's present also at this meeting, and Tino Schupan, who is also a professor in Germany. And we investigated how the introduction of algorithms changes the bureaucracy. And in our paper that will be published in Information Polity shortly, we actually build upon the work of these three people that you see on the slide. I've already discussed Max Weber on the left, and Max Weber presented us with the ideal type of the bureaucracy, which has later on has been called the machine bureaucracy, and it's really the idea of standardization, formalization, and rules that really guide the behavior of people in an organization. So it's the rules that police officers, for example, have to abide. The one in the middle is Henry Mintzberg, well known for his work Structures in Fives and many other works on organizations. From his work, I would like to take one specific element, and that's the professional bureaucracy. And in addition to what Weber wrote, Mintzberg emphasizes that in these organizations, there's also professionals that needs a certain autonomy to respond to specific situations, because they cannot all be guided by rules, because situations can be complex, non-routine, dynamic. And for that reason, organizations have started employing professionals who have a certain professional training to act in a certain way. And again, we see that in the police as well, where there are police schools, police academies that train police officers to work in a professional manner and to respond in an appropriate way. The one on the right will probably be not known to most of you. That's Arre Zuurmond. He's a former professor from the Netherlands. He's now the municipal ombudsman of the city of Amsterdam. And he wrote on the infocracy. And what he really wrote is that routine tasks in organizations are increasingly taken over by ICT systems, and these ICT systems actually guide how we do routine tasks. For example, if you look at the tax department, how they check your tax application, then it's mostly done by routine software that checks certain relations. So there's these three ideal types that have been developed before: the machine bureaucracy, professional bureaucracy, and the infocracy. And they differ in their authority, the impersonal social order for the machine bureaucracy, professional positions in the professional bureaucracy, and the information infrastructure in the infocracy. And they also differ in their tasks. The machine bureaucracy mainly works well for routine tasks. Professional bureaucracy is also good at dealing with non-routine tasks, and infocracy, as I indicated before, is also about routine tasks. What we claim about the algocracy is that it's system based on also on new technologies. So in that way, it's similar to the infocracy. Now it's algorithmic systems, but in contrast with the infocracy, it now focuses on non-routine tasks. So in that sense, it's more similar to the professional bureaucracy. So what we see is that there's a new ideal type being introduced that that highlights how technologies are used to deal with non-routine tasks. In our paper, we've developed that much further, and if you're interested, please drop me an email. I'd be happy to send it to you. But these are actually the key features that I would like to highlight for the meeting today. In our research, we did not only do conceptual work, we didn't only develop the ideal type, we also did empirical work to indicate how this ideal type can help us to see certain practices in organizations. And we did this research in Berlin. Lucas Lawrence did the empirical work in Berlin, and he investigated the use of the CrimPro system in Berlin, which is a predictive policing system used to fight domestic burglaries. So what it basically does, it provides a map with predicted areas with probable high risk areas, and the map can then be used to allocate resources, people to certain areas in an effort to fight domestic burglaries. So what we see here is that indeed a system is used for a key process in the police. Until recently, this key process was very much a professional process. There were information specialists with a lot of knowledge about the information processes and who were able to make good decisions. And now we see that the work of these information specialists is increasingly being replaced by these predictive policing systems. So we see that the non-routine tasks are indeed being taken over by these algorithmic systems. So we think this is a very good illustration, and it shows how this ideal type of the algocracy helps us to see the new form of the bureaucracy. So that was very briefly, and I'd be happy to go into that further in the discussion, but very briefly how these changes take place within bureaucracy. My second question is actually the external changes. And as I said, I'm working on that with my colleague Stefan Grimmelikhuizen. We wrote a paper on algorithmic administration or algorithmic government, and it's really about how the use of algorithms threatens legitimacy and what we can do about it. So it's really about this relation between legitimacy of government and changes in the organization. There's somebody putting drawings in my slide. I don't know why, but it's sort of an artistic endeavor. Thank you for that. The people you see here in the slide are Fritz Sharp and Vivian Schmidt, and they've been doing a lot of thinking about legitimacy. Very briefly, Fritz Sharp added the idea of outcome legitimacy. Legitimacy is often framed in the terms that I also used before, the term by Weber, where legitimacy of government is based on government that is controlled by democratically elected politicians. So that's what Sharp calls input legitimacy. It's at the starting point of the bureaucracy. There's the democratic mandate, and then the democratic mandate ensures that it's legitimate government. For example, in the Netherlands and other countries, there's a police law. The police law has been decided upon by our parliament. Our parliament has been elected by citizens, this police law sets the standards and the conditions under which police can function. So that's the input legitimacy for the police. What Fritz Sharp added is that the legitimacy is not only about the democratic process, but it's also about the performance of government. He looked a lot at the European Union and emphasized that the legitimacy of the European Union is not only about the democratic process, but it's also about the contributions of the European Union to welfare, safety, prosperity. And very similar, we can say that for the police, it's also not only about whether they have input democracy and function within a democratic mandate, but it's also whether they deliver in terms of creating a safe, secure society. Vivian Schmidt followed up on the work done by Sharp and added that it's also about the throughput legitimacy. It's not only about what goes into the organization and what comes out, it's also about what happens in the organization. Do the people in the organization conform with legal standards? Do they act in a transparent manner? And she calls that throughput legitimacy. So if we bring that together, you could say for the police, there's on the one hand the democratic legitimacy, the input legitimacy on the left, there's the output legitimacy on the right, and there's the throughput legitimacy on at the bottom. And these three types of legitimacy should be understood in their connection. So it's the three types of legitimacy that we need to study to understand the legitimacy of algorithmic government. So what are the threats? The first, what we did is we studied the literature, and we read a large amount of papers on the topic, and what we wanted to do is sort of organize the different arguments about the legitimacy of government based on the framework that I just presented with input, throughput, and output legitimacy. And on the basis of our reading of the literature, the first threat is the threat of undemocratic government. So that means that the connection between the democratic process and the functioning of an organization isn't working anymore. And some things here, and again, we can go into discussion, is that algorithmic developers make certain decisions. They make, for example, decisions about how to classify different ethnic groups in society, or how to use ethnic profiles for decisions about the deployment of police forces. So many seemingly technical decisions can be taken by developers, and then de facto they're taking political decisions. Second point is here, there's a lack of political oversight. So very often people in parliament have no idea about what's going on. We recently did a research project for our Dutch parliament to indicate how they could strengthen their oversight and what they need to know about algorithms and political developments to be able to assume their role. And a third point, which has not been mentioned much in the literature, is participation. I mean, if there's a new plan for city zoning or for other plans that affect you as a citizen, you can often participate. Well, there's very limited attention for participation in the design of algorithms. So in terms of solutions, we would say there's a need to strengthen the political sensitivity of public servants who are in charge of the design of algorithms, so that they can flag where there is a political sensitive issue and take that to the appropriate level. There's a need to strengthen the capacity to exercise political oversight. And we think it would be really interesting to explore whether citizen and stakeholder participation could play a bigger role in algorithms. The second threat is unlawful government. That's related to the throughput legitimacy. And here it's about things like low level of transparency. It's very often mentioned in the literature. We don't know what's going on. It's a black box. Privacy is a big concern. Poor translation of legal requirements in algorithms. So the techies start making the algorithms, but they don't really know what the legal rules are. And it's not clear what the responsibilities are. Is the developer of the algorithm responsible, the one who uses it, somebody else? So these are some risks that could result in unlawful government that's not in line with the rules and regulations that we have. And here solutions would be that we need to work on the transparency, that a legal assessment is needed, clarification of responsibilities, and some people also mentioned that there should be an independent supervisory authority for algorithms. So these are all solutions to make sure that we have legal government and not unlawful government. The third threat is incompetent government. And incompetent could be that there's a bias in the algorithmic systems where de facto we have a government that is discriminating against certain groups in societies. Another incompetent government would be a government that sort of avoids all types of human contact. We know that citizens quite often want to speak to a real person, or especially when there is a difficulty, they want to discuss their problem with a real person. Algorithms often reduce the amount of human contact. A third one is that these algorithmic systems promise a lot, but we don't really know whether they deliver. And we know from previous research that digital systems are often quite expensive, but do not always pay off. And a fourth one is that algorithmic revenues and expenses may shift over time. What I mean here is that people may respond to use of certain algorithms. For example, if certain criminal groups may know how predictive policing systems are used, they may try to game these algorithms, which could mean that over time they do not deliver as well anymore because people have come to anticipate predictive policing. Here, there's also some important solutions. One, minimization of bias is really important. It's important to make sure that these algorithmic systems do not discriminate against any group in society. There's a lot of discussion about there, and we believe that this is crucial to the output legitimacy of government, and to make sure that government performs well. There could be guidelines for the right to human contact. It should not only about limiting contact and making it cheaper by having robots interact with people, but it should be guidelines for the right to contact. A cost-benefit analysis of algorithms makes a lot of sense. Ethical reviews are needed. So I have some colleagues at the Utrecht Data School been working on ethical reviews, which can really help to see whether the algorithms do what we want them to do. And periodic audits by an independent auditor maybe make a lot of sense to make sure it works over time. So bringing this all together, a whole series of actions is needed to work on democratic, lawful, and competent government. So for democratic government, if we take it back to the example of predictive policing, it would mean that we have to make sure that the ones that develop these predictive policing systems are connected to democratic decisions about what we want these systems to do. That the way the systems are being coded and used is in line with legislation. There should be a link between lawyers that know the relevant legislation and techies that develop these systems. And we should ensure that these predictive policings contribute to competent government. There should not be a bias. It should be cost effective. It should be deliver the value that people want it to. So this brings me to the end of my my presentation. I was instructed to do it in 25 minutes. I think I've managed quite well. So I would like to end with 3 take-home messages. First one is we have to understand the process of algorithmization. We should, as scholars in public administration, have some understanding of the technology, but what is much more important to understand is of organizational and institutional change. And I think something like the algorithmic, the ideal type may be a lens to understand this complex process. So that's the second one also, from bureaucracy to algorithmic. I think we need to rethink our core theories. We did that for theories of bureaucratic organizations. There's also some really interesting work going on, for example, on street-level bureaucrats. What does it mean to be a street-level bureaucrat in the age of algorithms? So we have to rethink these concepts to get a good understanding of what's going on. And thirdly, we have to go from tech design to institutional action. It's really important that we understand that democratic government requires a lot of institutional work. And there's not one single bullet. It's not like if we make the algorithms transparent, then we solve the whole problem. It's much more complicated. We have to work on input, throughput, and output legitimacy to ensure that we have democratic, lawful, and competent government. This was my presentation. Be very happy to send you more material if you're interested, but for now I'm very interested in taking your questions.